Welcome back, everybody, to Dungeon Brew. John and I are continuing our series on a Thieves Guild, and today we're going to be talking about the Thieves Cant. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
Welcome back, everybody, to Dungeon Brew. John and I have been doing this series for probably a couple of months now. I don't even know how long it's been on the Thieves Guild. We talked about leadership and master roles and different jobs, as well as punishments, and now we're going to be talking about the infamous Thieves Cant, something that many of us like to try to incorporate into the game, but don't always know the know-how, and sometimes it feels like it bogs down the game quite a bit in trying to incorporate this very fine feature. Thieves Cant in of itself is oftentimes interpreted as being a particular way of using words or argot, slang, jargon, if you will, or even some type of like cryptography, is that the word I want, that is used throughout the town to kind of give known thieves some direction or some information about the particular guild so they can engage in secret with one another without alerting those that are not privy to guild information. John, why don't you get us started on the Thieves Cant?
Well, I think you just did, so well done. There are two ways of approaching Thieves Cant generally, and you've been running a Thieves Guild game for us for a few weeks here, and the approach that you've taken is using known words in order to, that have a secondary meaning for people within the guild or people that are thieves. So kind of the idea, just an example of one of the things that you did is, the guild master is the grandfather or the grandmother, so that we know that if we're talking, if we walk up to somebody and they're asking how our grandfather is, they're asking about the guild master, right? The secondary one is using slang terminology. So these would be words that most commoners would not know, but using slang terminology that have meanings that nobody would understand who is not a member of the guild. So, and I think both of these approaches are very interesting, and there's pluses and minuses to each one of them, and I think to some degree we're going to talk a little bit about both of them. So why don't we get started with the method that you've been using, just so that we can kind of get an understanding of how that works a little bit. So do you want to talk a little bit about like what you're using and how you came up with what you're involving in the game we're running?
Sure. So there's lots of forums that kind of talk about the different use of Thieves Cant, and the reason that I chose to use this particular version, where we're using known words in the course of gameplay to have private conversations, is so that my players themselves don't have to learn a whole nother language or jargon to try to have a conversation around things and kind of incorporate that piece into the game. So, like you said, there's specific like terms that are utilized specifically around family, around events, around rogue activities that you guys can incorporate into the course of dialogue to, say that you want to do something. So, like, let's say, how many candles are going to be counted tonight. You might be asking how many assassinations need to be done, or what's the body count that needs to be looked for. Those like types of specific God, I'm like stumbling over my words. Those types of things are utilized to like substitute whatever it is that's being said. And there's also things like talking about like, oh, I haven't seen you in so long. It's been 10 years. Like the amount of time that's being utilized lets people know how urgent the information is, or if there's danger that needs to be considered in the course of the conversation if somebody's eavesdropping. But I use particular language that's already known instead of the jargon, just because I didn't want players to have to then memorize a whole nother language on top of the meaning behind that language.
Right, which I think is the first major benefit to using the method you're using, which is basically you have to learn another language. Because you already know the word grandmother and grandfather, you know how to tell time. These are all things that make sense to us natively as players, and so it makes it a little bit easier to digest that information and put it into words and have a conversation that has meaning. Because even in just a few short weeks, I feel like we've been able to adopt a great deal of that in ways that make sense. With the reference sheet from time to time, but even without the reference, there's enough of it to where we're already catching on to it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Which I think is the first thing. Like that's the benefit. So the benefit is you're using known words, so you're not having to learn another language. I think that one of the benefits of using the other one is that I think it's a little bit more immersive in a lot of ways, where you start to feel like there is this secret language, there's these secret words that only certain people know. And it's also something that, from an in-game perspective, nobody else can understand. So it's very hidden, but on the same vein, it's also the kind of thing where if guards overhear you talking in this language, guards may not understand it, but they would understand that it is probably Thieves Cant and identify you as a thief. Whereas what you're talking about could be any innocent conversation, and it's easily played off as going, what are you talking about? We're just talking about our family members.
Yeah. But which I will say, with the other method of using jargon or argot, I think is also more true to what Thieves Cant originally was,
Yes.
and how it developed in England. I think there was some rumor that it came from the Romani, but I don't know if that's actually been established or not. But I think that it holds more true to what Thieves Cant is, which to me has an appeal. Like there's very much an appeal as a player of like, here's some of the language that was actually used, here's some of the jargon that we know that we can incorporate into the game, and it makes it feel, I don't know, like it's got more than just the course of gameplay to it.
Yeah.
It's just a deeper connection to it.
Yeah, and I think that's where I'm at, and this is kind of my default when it comes to the way that I create things, is I usually go to the most realistic, historical, etc., which is not always to the benefit of my players, and I recognize that, but it's just my preference as a GM that I really enjoy that. I like being able to go grab that '𝐃𝐨𝐬𝐵𝐿 and it have meaning, and the players may be like, what does that mean? And you can look it up, and then you recognize like what the words mean, that 𝐃𝐨 is a victim and 𝐵𝐿 is a purse, and it's not talking about grabbing someone's ass. So there's that kind of native interest for me. So one of the TV shows that I watch with my wife is The 100, and it's a ridiculous show, but the thing that I really like about it that keeps me coming back is that there is a language in it called 𝐷𝐢𝐤𝐿, and that basically is slang talk. And when I think about Thieves Cant, I think about the conversations that go back and forth between the people in this TV show, because a lot of what they use is basically Thieves Cant in a lot of ways. They're using slang terminology in order to convey meaning. So when they want to tie someone up, they say bind them up. So they're using the word bind instead of like tie them up or restrain them or anything else like that. It's bind them up. Or we're ready to leave, get them up. So, and I may not be using this 100% correctly, but that's the idea, is like they're using this slang in order to convey meaning. They're using, in often cases, what they're doing is they're using a known synonym in a different way to convey the same meaning. And when you hear it, you kind of are like, I understand what that means, but you have to be paying attention to it to really catch on to what's going on in that conversation.
Which I find extremely fun. Like, I find that very enjoyable. But in either one of these cases and what we're talking about, I think that the GM has to recognize this is probably going to slow down gameplay a little bit, and there's a time and a place to utilize it.
Right.
In many cases, for the course of the game, like, you just want to say, we're speaking in Thieves Cant.
Yes.
And then have a conversation naturally
Yes.
back and forth. So you're not having to go back to your reference sheet and continuously doing it. And I think this has a lot to do with just being a practice GM and knowing about the pacing and when to bring this into the gameplay to, like, bring that, I don't know, that making the fantasy feel real for a moment, to slow things down and kind of
Immerse yourselves.
immerse everyone into it. But it's can't be done all the time.
Yes.
It'll bog down the game, and if you have thieves that are not in your party, like our campaign right now, you're all thieves, so I have some allowance there.
Right.
But in most cases, you don't want your rogue having a private conversation with the GM and slaying, and nobody else around the table knows what's going on.
Which is the same advice, like that's almost verbatim the same advice that I give when it comes to doing voices, getting in character, role-playing actively. There's a time and a place for the active role-play. It's to immerse yourselves, get yourselves in the scenario, enjoy the conversation that's occurring, but there's other times where it's like summation is better. It is better, it's more efficient when you're trying to move gameplay along to drop with the funny accents and just say, okay, this is the conversation that's being had. I'm trying to convey this information. This is the goal. And, you know, you can go back and forth between those things, and still have an enjoyable game that is immersive when you need it to be immersive. It's efficient when you want it to be efficient, and that's really where Thieves Cant falls into. I also think it's funny that Thieves Cant is really the only thing that there's that huge desire to like play out in game, because nobody's going, I want to learn Draconic. I'm having a conversation in Draconic. Can't you role play a conversation in Draconic with me? Because it doesn't happen. So I just think it's funny that that's the kind of thing that you end up with, where Thieves Cant has to be in some way represented, or it's more likely to be represented in some way.
Yeah, I would agree. I also want to point out that Thieves Cant is more than just the language, which I'm sure you were going to touch on too. But it also has a lot to do with symbolism, signs engraved into walls to mark, a safe house, a house that's been already maybe robbed, to maybe let somebody know about a secret entrance. These types of symbols can be put up. It's against the cryptography that is around for a particular Thieves Guild, for people to recognize where they need to be going and what they need to be doing. And then even in our game, there's also symbolic things that can occur. So like in our particular game, we have individuals who have red plants that are hanging up outside of their
businesses.
God, why can't I not talk? Businesses. We'll let you know if they're affiliated with the Thieves Cant.
Yeah.
Or with the Thieves Guild. Or if you have people that are like lighting a red candle in their window, say they have information for that particular Thieves Guild that they need to share. So having other types of symbols and messages is also part of Thieves Cant.
Yes. And that's what I would consider like dialect specific. So it's kind of the same thing as if, we're Midwesterners, so if we head to the South, they're going to have slang for things that we don't entirely understand. We both speak English, but they have slang that we don't get. And that's kind of the same thing when it comes to guild-to-guild interactions. They speak the same language. One guild to the next guild to the next guild, they all kind of have this common language that they speak, but in each guild there's a specific dialect, and there are certain words, there are certain symbols, there are certain things that do not convey across in those types of conversations.
Yeah, and if you're looking for game pacing, I think that adding in those simple pieces or little signs around, especially if you haven't developed your Thieves Cant, is a great way to immerse your characters too. I did an entire campaign where these were around the city, and my rogue had to essentially find pathways through the city that were safe, based on what symbols he could find on the walls, and he had to roll checks to find those symbols and then interpret them.
Yes. So this is again going back to pacing and that type of information. When you are designing a game, like you said, we're running a Thieves Guild specific game. So it makes a lot of sense that we're getting more immersed in the Thieves Cant. We're talking about it. We're using it regularly. We have reference sheets because that's what the game is about. Like it would be a loss if we didn't have those things. Whereas if you were running, your run-of-the-mill game, you have one thief in the party, and they're the only one, you might give them a little bit of information on Thieves Cant so that they can kind of they can play with it if they want to play with it. And whenever you come across the typical Thieves Guild arc in your story, you talk about it a little bit, you use it, but it's not going to be nearly as much as you would expect in a very setting specific game.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to think of anything else that I would give a specific here. I think you just have a lot of fun with it. Be creative with it, and really determine at what level you want it embedded within the gameplay.
Yes, and the last thing that I'll leave off on, which is something that we've kind of hinted at in this video, we're obviously in this video we're not trying to give you the exact words or language that you should be using for Thieves Cant. There are plenty of resources online for the ways that various people have used this. So you can check on things like Reddit, GM Binder, some of those other ones where people have created entire documents specific to it. I would also look at historical sources. I mean, even just checking Wikipedia, they give you some good ideas for historical Thieves Cant. I personally like the idea of, like I said, from the 100 Trigedasleng. I think that it's really cool. There's a lot of language that's already developed for that you can easily take bits and pieces of, or you can adapt it, or you can use it. And there are actually entire video series dedicated to teaching you this language, this made-up language for a TV show. So I think that it's actually a very vibrant resource when it comes to trying to use that for something like Thieves Cant. So there are plenty of resources out there. It's really about the balance, it's about the immersion, and it's about using it in intelligent ways for your game in order to heighten the immersion without slowing down gameplay or bogging it down.
Absolutely. All right, well, if you guys have enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe button. Leave us a comment, maybe your favorite memory of using Thieves Cant or how you typically use it in your guild or in your game. We'd love to know. And otherwise, we'll see you all next week.
Judge and Brew.